Susan Bordo is Professor of Gender and Women's Studies and holds the Otis Singletary Chair in the Humanities. Professor Bordo is the author of The Flight to Objectivity, Essays on Cartesianism and Culture, Unbearable Weight, Feminism, Western Culture and the Body, The Male Body, A New Look at Men in Public and in Private, and more recently, The Creation of Anne Boleyn, A New Look at England's Most Notorious Queen. Although Bordo inhabits the academic world, she is known for the clarity, accessibility, and contemporary relevance of her writing. And yet again, her critiques of culture in relation to subject, gender, and body formations are nonetheless grounded in theoretical frameworks, particularly situating the body, the material body, within culture, historically speaking. This is why I had to focus on Hillary's health scare and Sexism Released, two sections from the book, The Destruction of Hillary Clinton, the core text of our discussion, obviously, this afternoon. It is striking to me, and I hope and think to Susan, that the destruction of Hillary Clinton is almost literally the decomposition of Hillary's body. Her hair, her weight, her health, her girlishness, or her age. Her girlishness was actually mentioned by her own husband, Bill Clinton. Her doggedness, or as many have labeled it, her bitchiness. Perhaps Susan Bordo departs here and wisely from Judith Butler's postmodern feminism, insofar as the woman's body is not merely a text to be reinscribed, but a fleshy reality that is unfortunately subject to its own destruction. We'll see. I present to you now Pulitzer Prize nominee, professor, and critically acclaimed author, Susan Bordo.
I loved that introduction. Loved it. I thought what I might start by doing is to make a little bridge between. Can you all hear me? No. Okay, I'm shorter than he is. Make a little. Now, is it okay? Okay. Make a little bridge. Is this better? Okay. Is make a little bridge between my mouth and the microphone. Between the last book that I wrote, The Creation of Anne Boleyn, and this book, The Destruction of Hillary Clinton. And as time goes on, that bridge becomes easier and easier and easier to cross. Because in many ways, what happened to Hillary is a compressed version of what happened to Anne Boleyn. That is, Anne Boleyn, what begins as attacks from her political enemies, right, even after they are disproved factually, linger on in the culture. In Anne Boleyn's case, they linger on for 500 years. They linger on in biographies, in histories, in fiction, in movies, to the point at which what was once a flesh and blood woman who had her faults, right, and also did some rather remarkable things for her era, became a caricature. And this goes as far as even some of the high literary productions of our culture, like Hilary Mantel, who's written fabulous series of books. But her portrait of Anne is the caricature of this scheming, manipulative, cold-hearted Anne. Now, of course, when we're talking about Hillary Clinton, we're talking about a transformation from flesh and blood woman to caricature that didn't take 500 years. It only took decades because we've got a mass media that deploys this information much more rapidly. You don't have to wait for historians and biographers. And but the same kind of process has gone on. You begin with attacks from political enemies. Those attacks, even when they don't prove to be founded, have been picked up greedily by the media and repeated over and over and over again to the point at which they achieve something like the status of fact in our consciousness. And they have been so difficult to bump from contemporary ideas about Hillary that even now that the election has passed, if you Google Hillary Clinton, you'll still see a series of attacks on her. There's something about Hillary, and of course, the full exploration about what that is in the book, that has been a magnet for all of our cultural projections about ambitious women. But it isn't just that, right? And one of the things that I try to do in the book is to provide a multifaceted analysis. People want to talk about the failure of the Democrats to win the election in terms of one thing. She didn't appeal to the Rust Belt states, or her campaign screwed up, or she didn't have a message, or she was unlikable. What I try to do is to look at a variety of factors that altogether created what I call a pylon of continuous character assassination that was so relentless that by the time we got to the election, it's a wonder that she actually did emerge with 3 million more popular votes than Trump. Right? The surprise is not that he won, right? The surprise is that she did as well as she did. Because by then, the real woman had been reduced to a cartoon. And I try to take apart the pieces of that. It's a very complicated story, although I try to tell it in an accessible way, because one has to look both at large things like long-standing gendered biases and the particular difficulties that ambitious women face. But then there is what Hillary once called the enormous right-wing conspiracy that we've come to see actually, though at the time she was, what? Is she paranoid? Well, it doesn't look so paranoid anymore, does it? Right? So we've got her GOP enemies to consider and their constant harassment by way of Benghazi and emails, relentless. The primary was a whole other context in which who Hillary is, and again, in all her complexity, good and bad, became reduced to a series of caricatures. And then, of course, we had the email scandal, which went on and on and on and on. Even Andrea Mitchell has said that they harassed her about her emails. James Comey and his very well-timed for the GOP announcements, right? All of this fed into a construction of Hillary that, remarkable as it is, led to a popular perception that she was actually less trustworthy than Donald Trump. It's extraordinary when you think about it. Hillary was the liar. Donald Trump was the straight shooter. That was the narrative for so long, and that narrative has been entrenched in popular culture. Now, my own book, unlike Shattered, another recent book that's come out, is not written from the point of view of an insider. I don't know Hillary. I don't know any of the campaign people. What I did was, as a prospective voter, a viewer, a purveyor of popular culture, someone who watches television, I took advantage of the time that I had, because I'm a professor and a writer, to pay very careful attention to what was going on. I watched every hearing from morning to night. I listened to every speech from beginning to end. Now, most people didn't have that privilege. People who work 9 to 5, they depend upon the headlines. They depend upon the breaking news. They depend upon the fragments that some pundit has extracted and told them, this is the truth of the situation. Leave work in the morning, turn on Morning Joe or Fox more likely, get your sense of what's going on, come back after a hard day's work, get your sense from the 5 o'clock news, and that's it. And so most people were not in a position to see how often Hillary's speeches were chopped up, fragments, the most sensational fragments presented, and the ones that were explanatory left off. And in particular, people were not in a position to see what was really going on with the emails. And even though, of course, I could have read some of the sections that have to deal with Hillary's body and gender, I decided today that I wanted to read a very short section from a chapter on the email scandal. The reason why I decided this at the last minute, is because yesterday, my husband and I were driving here, and we were listening to Shattered. I haven't read the whole book. I don't have a comment on the whole book. Eventually, I probably will. But what really struck me about the part that we heard was how much the authors of Shattered, presumably an in-depth look, had accepted the idea that Hillary lied about her emails. Most people think she did lie about her emails. Most people think she should be in jail. She didn't lie. Not only did she not lie, she didn't even behave with extreme carelessness, as James Comey said in his first announcement. But most people don't know this because the crucial moment in the congressional hearing in which Comey was interrogated after his first July announcement was never made into headline news, right? We got headline news about his first announcement and the extreme carelessness. We certainly got headline news about the second announcement, 11 days before the election, about the new cache of emails possibly pertinent to the election. We heard about that, but we never heard about a very, very crucial exchange that occurred between Elijah Cummings, Matt Cartwright, and Comey. I want to read you a little bit now from the book, which has to do with that. Again, I was startled to listen to the tape of Shattered and continually hear Clinton referred to as lying about her emails. So let me find my place. It's not going to be a long read because I do want us to have a lot of questions. There it is. Okay, just to put the context on this, you probably all remember the July announcement in which Comey, while claiming that Clinton had committed no crime, went on in an unprecedented way to suggest that nonetheless she had been extremely careless in her use of emails, right? A lot of people, in fact, it took him so long to get to the she broke no laws part that a lot of people came away thinking that in fact she was guilty, that he had declared her victory, or that at most it was a mixed verdict, right? Because of the way he had delivered that announcement and the emphasis on the extreme carelessness. Now remember, what Clinton had said was that she had not sent or received any emails marked as classified. That presumably was the lie. And that was what everyone was claiming she should come forward and apologize for. Hillary, for a long time, didn't want to apologize for anything because she didn't feel that she had done anything wrong. And she didn't do anything wrong. The rules about private emails were put in place after she left the State Department. Some of you may not know that. It didn't rise to the level of headline news. So the lie, the presumable lie, is that she didn't send or receive classified emails. And until the congressional hearing, that was just, the standard narrative. But, and here's a little bit about how the media reacted to Comey's first announcement. The media gave about 5 minutes to the fact that Clinton was cleared of any criminal activity in her handling of emails. The far hotter story was her carelessness. And of course, the implication, not stated by Comey, that she had lied to the public. Without allowing themselves a moment to examine Comey's words with care or to question his reckless breach of protocol, commentators immediately began to weave his report into their favored narrative of Clinton untrustworthiness. And I have a whole chapter in the book called Untrustworthy Hillary, and how that portrait of Hillary was established. It's a complete political indictment of her conduct, declared MSNBC journalist Kristen Welker. A direct disputation of the story she's been telling, added political commentator Chris Cillizza. It demonstrated that, here's a quote from Chuck Todd, trust and honesty continued to dog the Clinton campaign. Claiming that Comey had completely disputed Hillary's claims, Andrea Mitchell predicted grave political problems for Clinton. By the time Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski, and Nicole Wallace got in on the act on Morning Joe, it had predictably become a tale of bald-faced deception on Clinton's part. The show began with artfully arranged side-by-side clips contrasting Clinton's statements with Comey's assessments. Guests who tried to caution against hurried conclusions, like Steve Ratner and Howard Dean, were interrupted and talked over. Nothing was allowed to interfere with the narrative of untrustworthy Clinton. I now move to the part that I wanted to emphasize. It's called, my email chapter is broken into different parts. This is part 5. Comey is forced to retract his criticism, but the press doesn't notice. On July 7, 2016, House Republicans, unhappy with Comey's failure to indict Clinton, had asked him to answer questions from them, to which he agreed. Grilling him, they got little more than a slight elaboration of the initial claim that she was extremely careless. But when Democrats took over the questioning, things got rockier for Comey. First, Elijah Cummings pressed Comey to restate more explicitly that only 3 of the 110 emails in question had any kind of markings on them which would have alerted the recipient to their classified status. Those 3, moreover, were marked, and marked mistakenly, as it later turned out, only internally, with tiny letter symbols pertaining to specific sentences within the email. Then, Congressman Matt Cartwright forced Comey to admit that the emails with the internal C's were not properly marked, according to State Department manual, and that his previous comment that, this was Comey's previous comment, that any reasonable person would have known the emails were classified was implausible, if not an out-and-out falsehood. To judge unheaded emails as classified was in fact a standard that was unreasonable to apply. To the contrary, it would be a reasonable inference that the 3 documents missing the heading were not classified. Holding the manual in his hand, Cartwright calmly got right to the point. And here I'm going to give you the actual transcript. Cartwright, you were asked about markings on a few documents. I have the manual here, Marking National Classified Security Information. And I don't think you were given a full chance to talk about those 3 documents with the little C's on them. Were they properly documented? Were they properly marked according to the manual? Comey, no. Cartwright, according to the manual, then, and I ask unanimous consent to enter this into the record, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, without objection, so ordered. Cartwright, according to the manual, if you're going to classify something, there has to be a header on the document, right? Comey, correct. Cartwright, was there a heading on the 3 documents that we've discussed today that had the little C in the text somewhere? Comey, no. There were 3 emails. The C was in the body of the text. There was no header on the email of the text. Cartwright, and this is the I guess you couldn't call it the money shot, the money statement. Cartwright, so if Secretary Clinton really were an expert about what's classified and what's not classified, and were following the manual, the absence of a header would tell her immediately that those 3 documents were not classified. Am I correct in that? Comey, being as straightforward as he always is, that would be a reasonable inference. As what euphemistic, I suppose you could say, as Comey's statement was, it exonerated Hillary not only from any carelessness or negligence, right, because the emails were not marked appropriately, but also from the charge of lying about not sending or receiving any classified emails. It would have been entirely reasonable for her to conclude that the emails not appropriately marked were not classified, which is exactly what she had been saying for months. If you were watching the hearings, it was a revelatory moment. But how many viewers caught the exchange? Audiences at my talks, when I ran video clips of Cummings and Cartwright's questioning, were shocked and amazed. As for me, the hearing solidified my suspicion that Comey's unprecedented interference was indeed politically motivated or pressured. And since I wrote the book, we know a little bit more about that. For surely, at this point, Comey ought to have held a full-blown press conference apologizing for his inaccurate assessment of Clinton's handling of classified material. Instead, he was silent, while the media incessantly hammered away at Clinton's carelessness and lies about her emails. It was a recklessly disseminated narrative with no basis in fact. Yet, at the time his mischaracterization was disclosed, Comey offered no public correction or retraction of his previous commentary, which was left to do its political dirty work, unchallenged by the facts. Talk about a fact-free universe. Thus, for any viewers relying on TV news, MSNBC or Fox, didn't matter which, these exonerating exchanges never happened because their importance was never turned into breaking news or a headline story. In fact, the media dug its heels in even further. And here I'm going to skip one example because I don't want to read too long. The saga of lying Hillary and her emails went on and on, perpetuated not only in the headlines, but also in the polls. For example, take the July Washington Post ABC News poll results, showing that 56% of respondents felt the FBI was wrong in not charging Clinton, a result that had the GOP falling all over itself with glee. Comey's irresponsible comments on Clinton's carelessness, as Andrea Mitchell predicted, did cause big trouble for Clinton. But the poll didn't simply measure this, it perpetuated it. Here's how the survey phrased the question, repeating in it the same inappropriate and leading, and as it turns out inaccurate, editorializing that Comey indulged in. And here I'm going to read how the poll phrased the question. Just listen to it. As you may have heard, FBI Director James Comey has recommended not charging Hillary Clinton with a crime for her use of personal email while Secretary of State, saying she did not have any criminal intent. He also said that Clinton was extremely careless in her handling of classified information in her personal email. Do you approve or disapprove of Comey's recommendation that Clinton should not be charged with a crime? Consider, too, that even after Comey's exoneration, polling showed that 56% of Americans believe Clinton had indeed broken the law by relying on a personal email address, with another 36% piling on to say the episode showed bad judgment, albeit perhaps not criminality. Those numbers are ghastly, considering, as demonstrated in this chapter, and I haven't read the demonstration to you, that she in fact broken no laws or behaved carelessly. But they are unsurprising, given the overwhelming negative attention that network and cable news has paid to Clinton's emails. More airtime, as Matthew Iglesias reports, than to all policy issues combined. During the entire general election campaign, from June 7th to November 8th, Clinton only led over Trump in quantity of media coverage 4 times. Once was when she had pneumonia, which has been referred to. We can talk about that if you want. Once was during the DNC, and the other 2 were during and right after James Comey's announcement. And by the way, James Comey's second announcement, did it affect the election results, right? People talk as though there's absolutely no way we can know that. But in fact, polling done afterwards has demonstrated that after his announcement, Trump's approval rating went way up and Clinton's went way down, right? And Trump, in fact, before Comey's second announcement, was in deep shit trouble. The Access Hollywood tapes had been released. 12 women had come forward claiming sexual assault. And Republicans were bailing out left, right, and center. Do you all remember that? Right? And then James Comey makes his announcement, and everything turns around. But before we get to that, we've got months and months and months of what Andrea Mitchell admitted was harassment of Clinton. Thus, as Iglesias says, a story that was at best of modest significance came to dominate the U.S. presidential election, creating a misleading impression of Clinton's character and competence and vastly overshadowing coverage of both her accomplishments and her policy proposals. Is it any wonder that so many people had a totally false impression of what a Clinton presidency would be like? Between Sanders labeling Clinton as a Wall Street lackey and the GOP obsession with her emails, both of which were lavishly covered in the mass media, the Clinton campaign was defined by negative sound bites. It wasn't the case that she had no message. She wasn't given the space to deliver it, as the email scandal swamped the media. That's all I will read, and let's have questions.
If you have questions, is this no? Yes? If you have questions, please step up to the mic. We are recording, so we want to hear you, and we also want to record you. And please ask questions.
Hi. Thanks for the talk. So, since we're all eager for 2020 already, I'm wondering whether what your impressions are as to what the election's going to look or campaign's going to look like. So, how is the character that Trump's going to play compared to the one he played last year, and what are the Democrats going to take away from how this past election went for them?
Well, great question. Not one that it is in my pay grade to answer. I really have no idea what is going to happen. And I say that, usually I'm not good at predictions, but especially I'm not good at predictions now because we are unhinged. We have become an unhinged country, and I don't know what's going to happen. as far as the Democrats go, this raises a whole other topic for discussion. Because the Democrats, as far as I'm concerned, have been engaged in an orgy of self-flagellation that is completely uncalled for, and have been doing their best to divide rather than unite their party. Now, that's a controversial stance, I realize. And, it's something that, of course, is not raised in my book because it happened after my book. But I definitely want to write about it now. So the Democrats, I think they have the wrong diagnosis of what went wrong. And I don't think they have their act together. My biggest hope in terms of the next election is the absolutely incredible, inspiring, multifaceted, diverse resistance that Trump's election has generated. I mean, the day after his inauguration, the march, I woke up and I was in the middle of writing the epilogue, and I was just like overwhelmed with what this said about the future. And I do think the future is in the hands of the next generation, or, well, talking about me, it would be the next generation. And I think that they're up for it. I'd like to see a more understanding on the part of the Democrats of the importance, and this is something that Hillary always emphasized. We criticized her for not having a message. But the fact is, she always emphasized the importance of human rights, whether they be reproductive rights, children's rights, women's rights, immigrants' rights. And what happened was, in my estimation, thank you for the applause, I like hearing it, we kind of fell into a stupor. There was Obama, this generous, wise, feminist man, right? And I think that we began to feel, and of course I'm using the we here, kind of inclusively, we began to feel that, gee, these things are all kind of safe now. Gay people can marry each other, and nobody's going to take away our reproductive rights. And, he didn't have the greatest record on immigration, but at least he wasn't calling for any massive bans. And there's a kind of collective sleep. The day after the election, we all woke up. And that waking up is what gives me hope about the future.
Thank you for your questions. Excellent. Yes, sir.
Okay. Hillary Clinton has been attacked, for decades and decades. I even had hair when they started. And this was going...
I was 50 pounds thinner. Yeah.
No, the question is, all of these things we've read about, you hear very little from the Democratic Party. There is no postmortem. There was lots of money spent. These attacks have been coming on. Flynn get in debates, crooked Hillary at the convention, crooked Hillary. It's not just the media, but this was a theme the Republicans were beating over and over again. And in the debate, Hillary would not stop and say this to my face or let's discuss this. They were totally ineffective in dealing with it. And I think, sure, Comey deserves a lot of criticism, blah, 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 but I'm really not confident the Democratic Party has in it enough to go on. And I think she's no dumb lady, and what the heck, and her husband and she certainly have some responsibility for that situation.
It's a good question, comment. I both agree with you and I don't agree with you. The part that I agree with is that, when Michelle Obama gave her wonderful talk and said, when they go low, we go high. Well, the Democrats have really never learned to go low in an effective way. And this has allowed them to be trampled by the GOP. Trampled. What was our response to this election? Mea culpa, mea culpa. What did we do wrong? And what that translated to was, she's at fault. The witch. She's the one who led us into this. And her campaign. Right?
That's not fair.
So I do agree with you that I was kind of, I wish that, not that I want them to play dirty, right? But there is a certain kind of, I would have liked some different responses to what was going on that were stronger and more hard-hitting. So I agree with you with that. But where I disagree is that I think, and this is really my overwhelming emphasis in the book, and it's not because I think the media are devils, right, or creating fake news, right? I don't see them as an opposition party. I want to distinguish myself from Trump there very clearly. But I think in the face of what mainstream media has become, there's very little one could do to create another narrative. Once they had their narrative going, right, it just barreled forward, and nothing was allowed to interfere with it. A good example is that exchange. I mean, my mind was blown when I saw that exchange. I thought, oh my God, in the evening news tonight, we're going to hear that Comey admitted that Clinton did not lie. No, we never heard it, right? So, and then with, the constant taking things that she said, giving us a piece of it. This has happened to her since the beginning of her time as First Lady in Arkansas. Giving us a piece of it and not the rest, like the deplorable comment, right? What could you do? What can you do to counter a media that will not take your full explanations and present them to the public? So I see the media as very, very powerful and very culpable in this.
Yes, ma'am.
So you know where I'm coming from. I went to law school with Hillary. I was a Hillary person from the beginning. But why couldn't Hillary attack Wall Street the way Bernie did, the way apparently Joe Biden told her to do, the way her husband told her to do? Why didn't she acknowledge that there were that the middle class was being hollowed out?
She did.
Human rights are fine. She didn't.
She did.
Not often.
Those speeches
not
were
enough.
not covered. Okay, let me just say
Okay,
what my
'cause-
impression is of it, having watched it. What was covered? The mass rallies in which Bernie shouted his message to thousands of people. When Hillary gave a policy speech that was critical of mass incarceration, critical of Wall Street, never got covered. Never got covered. So I think that you could say, Hillary. There's another dimension to this all, which is what do we value and look for right now in a leader? It seems as though the more, okay, these are gross generalizations. Please forgive me for them, right? Gross gender generalizations. It seems as though the more feminine style of conversing, listening, trying to see the other side. I'm calling it feminine. That doesn't mean that men don't do it. But what did we see in this election? And being explanatory. Hillary is a very explanatory person. She doesn't talk in sound bites. And when she talks in sound bites, it really doesn't come across very well. What did we value in this election? Who came to the top in terms of popularity? Well, Trump isn't very popular, but he didn't win. People who loved the adoration of crowds, people who loved to speechify, people who loved to speak in short, declarative, but very macho sentences about whether it was about Wall Street or it was about the immigrants, right? We really did favor a very masculinist style in this election.
So you think Elizabeth Warren is masculine?
I think that Elizabeth Warren, no, I don't.
Good.
I think that Elizabeth Warren, were she to actually, this is, I happen to like Elizabeth Warren a lot. But I suspect that were she to get in a position of actually running, we would see something very different coming from the press and from people. We have some evidence for it. When she was running for governor of Massachusetts,
Senator.
Senator of Massachusetts, the press came after her. She is strident. She is shrill. She is a schoolmarm. When women do that, it reads differently than when men do that.
Fair enough.
Right. So, in a way, I share your frustration. But on the other hand, the fact that we're unable to value different styles, and in fact, a style like Hillary's, which seems to me would be more amenable to governing than a speechifier, is a sad statement on where we're at.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Thanks for the question. This microphone, please.
Here?
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I agree with your comments that you made about the press coverage. So what is the accountability of the press for the way they covered her? I mean, it seems like they're moving on now. They're picking on Breitbart and Fox News and fake news, which is all good, but they're not going back and revisiting all those chyrons that CNN used to run. I would almost argue that CNN caused more problems for her than Fox News.
I would agree,
during the
and
last
MSNBC
election.
as well.
Yeah.
Because people trusted MSNBC.
So what is the accountability, and who holds the accountability, and who presses the
It's an
presses them?
excellent question. The answer is there's virtually zero accountability. We've yet to see, unless you consider me press, we've yet to see an expose or even just an admission of the role that the media played coming from the press. Now, what we have seen are some journalists who have taken it upon themselves to go back, in a way, to the old tradition of fact-based investigative reporting, right? Or, in the case of someone like Joy Reid, a more aggressive approach to the liars, right? Holding their feet to the fire. So we have seen some individual reporters who have tried to do it differently. But as far as the press taking accountability, they just won't do it. I have a little anecdote to tell, actually, about that. It's an anecdote that demonstrates both the failure of the press to take accountability and also the difficulty of disrupting the narrative. I was on MSNBC, actually, a few weeks ago. And not in a very prominent spot, but I was pretty excited and nervous. Anyway, Saturday afternoon, and oh my God, I've forgotten the name of the reporter. But in any case, I'm sitting there and I have my little earplug in, right, waiting for the first question, and I hear in my earplug, and now we have the author of a new book that argues that Hillary made one big mistake that cost her the election. First of all, I argue against Hillary blaming. Second of all, I don't claim anyone made one big mistake, but there were a variety of mistakes. So I'm sitting there, oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to answer this without being rude? I did try my best, but this is a good example of how that narrative just keeps plunging forward. And the fact is that, not to, no, I won't say what I was going to say. No.
Professor Bordo has given you license to.
I encourage you to think about what gets reviewed and what doesn't get reviewed in the New York Times and other mainstream. Think about it, and think about where they put the blame, the different books, where the blame is put, where accountability is called for. Just think about it.
Well, at this point, I feel like a free press is all that's keeping us from oblivion.
It's true.
So I'm very grateful that the press is there. However, I would argue on the accountability side that it's on us, too, to demand that our journalism is high-quality journalism. And if they get the ratings and they sell the papers, then they're going to keep producing the kind of news that they produce. So my question is more related to this wonderful phenomenon that we've seen of more women running for office all over the country, at the local level, at the state level. And I want to know, I haven't read your book yet, but I wonder to what extent is what happened to Hillary Clinton because she's Hillary Clinton and she's been breaking barriers since she was applying to law school and attending Wellesley, and how much of this is the phenomenon that all women running for political office would face, and is this going to, is this perfect storm doomed to repeat for all the women who are now standing up all over the country?
It's a great question, and obviously it's one that all of the young women who are thinking of running for office want to know the answer to, And I think it's a little bit of both, or a lot of both. In other words, I think that what our election showed, not just the results of it, but the way it was covered, and still the way she's being talked about, the gendered, images and metaphors, the witch and bitch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is that we, and I've been interviewed by some European reporters who think that the U.S. is particularly poor in this way, that we have a special problem with strong, ambitious women, and I think it's true. And I'd love to see a historian dig into it and sort out all the reasons why. At the same time, Hillary, for all kinds of complicated reasons going way back to her marriage to Bill, right, has been a particularly vulnerable sponge, target, Rorschach test, whatever image you want to come up with for those kinds of responses to ambitious women. And that I talk about at great length in the book, both the problems that she faced that seem to be endemic to the ambitious female, and also what was the result of her particular biography. Because there are specific things. I mean, she's had an unusual life. Thank you, it's a great question.
Yes, please.
In the 1990s, there was one caricature of Hillary Clinton that prevailed in the public mind. And by 2016, it seemed to me at least that there was a completely different caricature that appeared to be constructed before our very eyes over the previous 5 years, such that I have a 60-year-old mother-in-law who hates Hillary because of the cookie baking comment.
Yeah, right.
And a 25-year-old brother-in-law who hates her because he thinks she's a corrupt criminal. Yeah. Am I right to see a radical discontinuity
Yes.
here, or do you see any continuity between those?
No, it's great. A great comment. I love your examples, too, because they so hit it on the nose. Hillary's, like Anne Boleyn, the career of Hillary imagery and attacks has been like that. It hasn't been just one caricature straight through. But it's always been a bit extreme, And there was even a period in which she was being criticized for being too virtuous. I don't know if, those of you who are my age remember this, but it was like, she went straight from, there was the first construction of her as the person who criticized women who wanted to stay at home. Totally a function of what I mentioned before. The press not reporting the second part of what she said, which was, yes, I could have stayed home and baked cookies and had teas instead of pursuing my career, but I chose to do what I did. And all my life, I have and will fight for women's right to choose one or the other or both. That never made it. What made it was cookies and tea. And housewives all across the country were outraged. But then there was a period when she was in the White House for a while, when she was being attacked for being too virtuous. Saint Hillary with her causes and, trying to get health care passed. And, so we've seen, and now, and then when she was running against Obama in that primary, the key thing was her unlikability. Remember when Obama kind of tripped over that one time? It's an interesting piece because it was a moment when Hillary behaved as people wanted women to behave. She got girlish, right? Oh, that hurts my feelings, right? When she heard that she wasn't likable enough. And the next day she teared up and talked about how personally she took it. we didn't hear about Hillary the criminal then. Yes, we did from the GOP. The GOP has been doing the Clinton criminals from way back in Arkansas and the Arkansas Project. But they really, they dug in with Bill and his sexual stuff. Didn't start out as sexual stuff. It started out as the Whitewater investigation. But they kept going and going and going until they found something. Same thing with Hillary. You start out with Benghazi, can't get anywhere there, keep going, going, going. Emails. It really wasn't until this election cycle that Hillary the criminal became the big thing.
Thank you. We have time, I think, for one more question. Yes, please.
Women need a critical mass. If the resistance now is that women should run for office, they'll be trained to run for office. If 600 people run for office and 6 win, that's 6 more than would have been there if that hadn't happened. So I think the future is going to pan out in that regard. But my question, and I haven't read a lot of the follow-up analyses yet, except in book reviews. I read all the reviews. I haven't read the books. Right. I have seen nothing about why Obama did not support her during the campaign. I'm going to turn this into a question so it's honest.
Okay.
Is there an analysis going on about how the most popular president in recent time did not support his candidate? And what would we have seen had he come out on the campaign trail earlier than 2 days before the election?
Okay. These are great questions. Great questions. Barack Obama, to be respectful, I have great affection for him, so I tend to think of her as Hillary and him as Barack. But in any case, I think that this is another feature of this: when they go low, we go high. He was so, I believe, that he was so afraid of seeming partisan that he kept himself stifled until the last minute. And in fact, when he knew that the FBI was investigating the Russians, right, he stayed silent. July, you all know this, but just to, put a marker on it, July, as Comey was talking about Clinton's emails and how careless she was, the FBI was already investigating the Trump-Russia connection. And Barack Obama knew about it, and he didn't say anything about it. And I think for him, I don't know him, but I think for him it really was, this kind of like reserve about coming out too forcefully for her. I think he thought it would backfire. That if he came out too forcefully for her, people would, because there are a lot of Obama haters too. People would, it would backfire.
I hope there's a follow-up study to that.
I hope so too.
I gave you an alternative reality, and we're going to have time for one more brief question, please.
All right. So based on what happened to Hillary, do you think whether it's Elizabeth Warren or Kristen Gillibrand or Kamala Harris or whomever the next biggest female candidate is, do you think that she's in some ways doomed to the Hillary treatment, or do you think that it was a uniquely Hillary moment?
I don't think it was a uniquely Hillary moment. However, it now is part of a history that we learn from, right? And I think that having learned what happened to Hillary, there may be greater preparation, strategizing of a certain sort, readiness to counter the stuff that we know is going to be coming. Hillary was, for the most part, awfully polite throughout most of her campaign. I think that there is as sad as it is to say this, I think there is a sweet spot that the winning female candidate has to hit. I don't know exactly what it looks like. I mean, maybe Kristen Gillibrand has it. I don't think, much as I love her to death, I don't think Elizabeth Warren does. That, that spot that would somehow avoid the rocky terrain of the gender stuff. I think with enough people strategizing and enough women, supporting, that, it could turn out okay. But the last election certainly isn't a very hopeful indicator.